Hi, we're moving now on to Luke chapter 19, and it's a great chapter. Again, it starts off with a parable, not parable, the story of Zacchaeus, the tax collector. Zacchaeus is one of those stories that most of us know just because there's like Tweet Kids songs and that sort of stuff. But it's a great story that Luke highlights of Jesus encountering the written off, the marginalized, and the disenfranchised, and not only showing them love, which is great, not only drawing alongside them, which is great, but actually he sees transformation massively in their life. 2 chapters ago, bearing in mind the original manuscript wouldn't have had chapters and verses, we have almost a very big sandwich, if you like, where Jesus is really attacking the attitude of the Pharisees around money. And now, a fair chunk of the way through, and a fair chunk later, we see someone with a very different attitude to money. Zacchaeus starts off with a similar attitude to the Pharisees. He's only quite grasping. He's a chief tax collector, and he's wealthy. So he's probably kind of, not only is he probably getting money from his pay, but he's probably also getting money from ripping people off. In fact, is that if I've cheated anyone out of anything, he says in verse 8, I'll give them back 4 times that amount. That probably implies that, I think if I think probably that's maybe a little bit hyperbole that I have cheated anyone and I'm willing to make amends, is what he's saying. Anyway, I'm jumping ahead of myself because this guy was ostracized. He was somebody who was, he might be rich, like the rich fool. He had it all in terms of finance, but in terms of relationship with the outside community, his community, the religious community, Zacchaeus is clearly a Jew. Yeah, he's very much in debit. But he wants to see Jesus. And again, it's that there's a continued theme throughout Luke of people who probably almost should have given up on the idea that God could be interested in them. The woman with the issue of blood, the blind Bartimaeus, Zacchaeus, all these people who kind of would feel like, I don't know, maybe I've gone too far for God to want anything to do with me, still have that deep yearning in the depth of their being to connect with Jesus. Maybe there's something of the Augustine idea of our hearts being restless until they find their rest in him, Jesus. So he tries to see Jesus, and the crowd won't let him through. It's like, it's that tax collector, I'm not moving for you. So he ends up climbing up to up the sycamore tree and sees Jesus. And Jesus says, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. I want to receive hospitality from you. Sounds a bit rude in our culture, but in one sense, Jesus is validating him with honor. He's saying, I'm willing to count you as worthy of being with you. I will enter your house. I will enter your home. I will give you dignity. It's a bit like the Queen saying, any chance I could pop in and use your loo. Actually, maybe that's not a great example. But it's like a massive validation of who Zacchaeus is. And he does it publicly. Interestingly, verse 6, he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. And there's a whole theory that Zacchaeus fell out of the tree, but that's another story entirely. People were scandalized at this. He's gone to be a guest of the sinner. It's okay maybe to talk to people. It's maybe okay to just sort of, be nice to people. But actually, Jesus received hospitality. I just want to pick up on that a little bit for a moment. Interestingly, when Jesus in John's Gospel has the longest conversation he's recorded to have in Scripture, and the only time he directly reveals that he's the Messiah to somebody other than to Simon Peter, when Simon Peter gets it right and Jesus affirms him, is to the woman at the well. And what does he say to her? A woman he could quite easily, in those cultures, well, he shouldn't have been talking to anyway, She's a woman, she's a Samaritan, all that sort of stuff. Life's evidently gone horribly wrong for her. What's he say to her? Can you get me a drink? Can I have a drink? I think we're very good. I'm very good at serving people, but sometimes there's a greater humility that I'm not so good at, and that's allowing people to serve us. Nor does I need to be served because I'm important, but almost that receiving things from other people, allowing other people to have the dignity and hospitality of knowing that they're validated and worth it and valuable. Being served sometimes can be an amazing act of love you can do for another human being. Jesus doesn't just talk to Zacchaeus. Jesus goes that extra mile of treating him like a person of honor when he's a person that's habitually despised. Amazing story. And he's transformed. He says, I'll give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times that amount. And I think what we're meant to do is look at this passage, and then we're also meant to look at the Pharisees' attitude to money, and then the rich young ruler's attitude to money, and then finally we see this story of someone, he gets it. He gets it. Money itself's not the issue, really, but it's the heart behind the money that happens. This guy suddenly realizes that money, his God, is not important. It's your heart, it's what you do, it's how you live your life. Zacchaeus almost echoes Matthew or Levi, the tax collector, that left everything to follow Jesus. This person who is written off is the person that really gets it. And Jesus says, despite all the whinging of the crowds, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save those who are lost. Jesus took somebody who they would never imagine could change. Somebody who would probably was just considered to be beyond the pale. And this guy's life was turned around. I wonder with me, I wonder with us, are there people we look at and think they'll never change? They'll always be like that. Those type of people, they're always like that. Do we sometimes have this baggage about the ability for people's lives to turn around? Salvation can come to this man too, because he or she or they are children of God, made in God's image, loved and precious. The money theme continues. Jesus tells a parable, but this time, interestingly, money and money and the word talents is often used. Talents being a little bit like the English word. It's an interplay between both the idea of finance, cash, and gifting, and I guess that's sort of the word. That's where the word origin comes from. And again, in the NIV, it talks about Midas, which loses the translation. But the idea that the king has given his people, he's equipped them with resources, and he expects them to steward them well. He does tell them explicitly to put this money to work until I come back. Interestingly, which I think is worth pointing out in the text. God gives us gifts and expects us to use them, just think of the tragedy if, I don't know, Beethoven never really kind of got on the piano, or I don't know, Van Gogh never picked up a paintbrush. The world would be a much poorer place, or Dickens or Shakespeare never picked up a quill. The expectation of God when he gives gifts and talents, resources to us, is he expects us to use them, to put them into practice, to make them work. The first one says, "Sir, your miner has earned 10 more. Well done, good and faithful servant," his master replied. be in charge of 10 cities. The second said, sir, your mind has earned 5 more, be in charge of 5 cities. Interestingly, the passage then says, but also it says, you've been trustworthy in a small matter, be in charge of something. That idea that, again, it says, in the Bible, the idea that, if we can be faithful with small things, we can be faithful with large things. It's the choice. It's not about how much someone gives us, or what, or the scale of it. The issue is actually, are we faithful with what we got? And if we're faithful with what we got, we'll be faithful when we get more. It's our character that matters. And the last one, the guy says, basically, here's what you gave me, and I haven't done anything with it. And to which the king is angry, and he gives it to the guy who's got quite a lot already. I tell you that anyone who has, Jesus says, more will be given, but the one who has nothing, even what they have, will be taken away. Interestingly, this idea, Jesus talks about the enemies of mine who do not want me to king over them. Bring them here and kill them in front of me. Again, I struggle with this imagery of Jesus talking like this. For Luke, it evidently isn't a problem. But for verses 21st readers, I really struggle with it. But there is something about that choice. Do we want Jesus to be our king or not? And actually, by faithfulness to Jesus is the way we need to be. And not being faithful to him is not a place of blessing and fruitfulness and growth. Interestingly, the third servant, the one who only has the one, doesn't really invest his talent. The thing he attacks is the character of the master. We've no way of knowing whether he was good or bad, really. But actually, that's often the fault of what most of our thinking, I believe, comes from the fault of not understanding the character of God. The idea of kingliness continues now when Jesus enters Jerusalem. Jesus rides in on a donkey. Interestingly, it does sound like he nicks it. When you untie the colt, that's what you meant to say. The master needs it, people throw their coats on the floor. Someone said, "Why they throw their coats on the floor?" I remember this lady, Kate Wharton, I don't know, that's a funny word. A friend of mine, Kate, put on a Facebook feed. She said, asking the school, "Why do you think they threw their coats on the floor?" And the kid said, "Because red carpets hadn't been invented then." Actually, the kid got it. It's this idea of honor and dignity, and the donkey, the colt, walks through with Jesus on it, and people were just wanting to bless and worship Jesus. They realized that this was a prophetic act. This is tying in with a prophetic picture that this is a messianic image of God coming in and changing things. But more than that, this again ties in with Luke's message of Jesus being a very different Messiah from the one that they're expecting. Jesus hasn't done it the way they expected all the way through. And so Jesus coming in on a donkey actually doesn't seem surprising to us, because all the way through, he keeps on not doing it as they thought he should. The Pharisees didn't like the fuss and said, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." I tell you, he replied, "If they keep quiet, even the stones will cry out." We then see Jesus at the end of this little bit, crying over the city. Again, there's a hint of that earlier in the passage. The pain of that, and knowing what's going to happen to Jerusalem is painful there. But Jesus also knowing that this journey into Jerusalem is a victory parade, is a prophetic statement, is a sort of culmination of his ministry. But that ministry is going to have its greatest victory in Jesus's death and resurrection, in his self-giving love that will break and destroy him. But obviously that's not the end of the story. And the passage then ends with Jesus in the temple, driving out those who are exploiting people, saying, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers. Again, a prophetic statement that God is restoring the relationship with his people, and at the heart of it is justice and prayer and relationship. Exploitation, unhealthy power dynamics, and all of that mess and rubbish has no place in the kingdom of God. Jesus continues to teach in the temple, but the chief priests and teachers of the law are trying to kill him, but yet they just can't get to him because people are hanging on his words. It's a funny chapter, really. It's got lots of different bits in it, but again, we see this build up and building up all the way through Luke's gospel, right to the point where we know that Jesus is going to die, because the pressure is mounting. Luke keeps on saying, they're out to get him, they're out to get him, they're out to get him. And we know that soon that's going to happen. It's almost like, if you watch a film and you know that something's going to happen, they want us to have like little hints. If it happened in the past, you get what's called flashbacks. But almost if something's about to happen, you get the script has all these little pointers that make you flash forward, that makes you imagine what's going to happen. Luke takes this literary device really seriously, and all the way through there's little nudges that it's going to happen in the future. Mark, in his gospel, does this much more. The whole of Mark's narrative is a passion narrative, really, and the whole thing centers around the death and resurrection story. Well, mainly the death story, actually. There's only a little bit of the resurrection in Mark, but it keeps pointing towards him, and even the stuff that's not overtly about Jesus' crucifixion still points there. The whole thing centers and hinges on Jesus' crucifixion in Mark, and it all hints, points, and builds towards what Jesus is about to do. So, Luke's Gospel, chapter 19. Jesus is now in Jerusalem, and he's ready on his path to Calvary.